Let's reconnect then with our correspondent Holly Hudson, who's in London, where Julian Assange is currently serving a 50-week prison sentence for violating bail conditions. Holly, hopefully we'll be able to hear you a bit clearer this time round, but do get us up to speed then with what prosecutors, that they have reopened the case against Assange. So what's next?
Yes, well, Swedish authorities, the deputy chief prosecutor telling reporters in Stockholm they believe they've got probable cause to suspect him of rape. Now, no charges have been filed. This is a reopening of a preliminary investigation that was dropped 2 years ago by prosecutors who said they simply couldn't continue whilst Julian Assange was in the embassy. But obviously that has now all changed following his arrest in London last month. It's made it possible. It's also following renewed calls by the lawyer of the woman who accused Mr. Assange back in 2010 of rape for him to be brought back to Sweden. Now, as we know, he's already facing an extradition request to the US as well. In some ways, this takes us back to square one, back to 2010, before he sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in relation to this initial investigation. But the big difference this time is that he's facing an extradition warrant to the US as well.
Right, speaking of that extradition to the US and Sweden, which one takes precedence? Do we know what's going to happen then?
In this instance, what will happen is the UK Home Secretary will have to decide which takes priority. Now, that decision rests with things like the gravity of the allegations, the order in which they were made. Now, we know initially Mr. Assange sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, not, as he said, because he feared extradition to Sweden or even facing this investigation, because he feared rendition in the US. Now, that's something the Home Secretary may also have to consider, whether Sweden will simply then extradite Mr. Assange to the US, where he faces one count of, as we know, of computer intrusion, hacking into Pentagon computers to steal military secrets. Now, this issue has caused tension here politically in the UK, with a lot of pressure being put on by the opposition party Labour to avoid extradition to the US, for Prime Minister Theresa May to choose to extradite Mr. Assange to Sweden. 70 MPs have signed a letter to that effect, calling for him to face what they believe is a more serious allegation of rape over the charge in the US. But as we know, Mr. Assange is serving 11 months here for skipping bail in relation to that initial investigation in Sweden, so he will have to serve that time yet. And of course, he will likely appeal any extradition warrant, not just to Sweden, but to the US. So this, in effect, makes his legal fight anything just a bit more complex.
All right, thanks for that update, Holly Hudson, speaking to us from London.